Hello, I'm Gayla Austin, and today we're talking about crime and fraud. And is it required then a fraud to be disclosed? And even though with lawyers, any communication between a lawyer and a client services, they're confidential. And there's an exception to that, though, and that is when that client is going to or is in the process of committing a crime or fraud. And if you've been listening to my videos, you might know that I was working in an estate case, and there was real property in an estate case, and the personal representative was subject to a court order to sell that property at a sheriff's sale. That means at the courthouse, sheriff's sale. And instead, the personal representative decided to sell the property via a realtor. And I'm talking about this today because of the importance of following a court order. I've worked in a law office my entire life, and what I've always found confounding is that people don't understand that a court order is exactly that. I remember finding myself saying or thinking many times, what part of court order do you not understand? And I'm saying that because it is law and it is effective. What's called from the bench, which means at the time that the judge issued it. And I'm talking about this because in the discourse today, what is going on politically, as we watch these lawsuits and court orders take place in the federal bench mostly now, in federal courts across the country, we see court orders being issued and they're not being followed. And that is violative, especially when there's a crime or fraud happening. And that's why I decided, as my part of upholding the rule of law and the Constitution, that what is the rule about following a court order? And there's been much discussion about this already, and in order to help it be hopefully a little more applicative, easy to see, I'm talking about my own case because that doesn't violate any confidentiality. We're just talking about what happened. And in my case, this personal representative was subject to a court order, and that person didn't follow that court order. In other words, court order to sell the property in a specific way. And instead, that personal representative, because they would get more money from selling via a realtor, decided to do that. Now, of course, did they tell me that? No, of course they didn't tell me they were doing that. I mean, I ended up finding out about it through the realtor because at the time I was doing a lot of real property work, and the realtor, I found out via the realtor, wait a minute, isn't this a probate, and isn't this subject to some rules? So I want to talk about what the rule is. Why am I doing that? Because as we're talking about across the country that there are rules that come down about the case and the law in the case itself, that is one type of rule. But there are some other rules that apply, and I noticed that those, not only are they not being followed many times by the Trump regime lawyers, they're just not following ethics rules at all. It's like when they left law school, they completely forgot that those apply. And so the reason I'm talking about this is that not only do the rule that comes out of the case itself and the precedent of that applies, but so do these ethics rules, and that is what is being disregarded. So back around into my example, what is this rule about here? And we talked earlier about, there are model rules of professional responsibility, and while they differ to some degree via states, I mean, that's always an argument. Oh, well, this is a different state, it doesn't apply. That's just simply not true. And the concern is that state bar associations are not enforcing the ethical rules with lawyers. It's like, where is the enforcement of this rule? And why is it, or how is it that you can just, like in my case, ignore this rule? So this came before the state bar prosecutor in the state that I was licensed in. I ended my license in April of this year, of 2025, and they refused to implement what is called this crime or fraud exception, which would require this personal representative to disclose this, first of all, but then not continue with her activities and to follow then the court order. And so this is called, typically when you talk to your attorney, it's called the attorney-client privilege. And many people, if you're a non-lawyer, you're familiar with that. Of course, if you're a lawyer, you already know that. But there is an exception to that when there's a crime or a fraud. That makes sense, doesn't it? Because if somebody's doing something illegally, if I know about it, I know they're doing that. First of all, I'm simply not going to help you do that. But not only am I not going to help you do that, I'm not going to be involved or as your counsel. And so what I did, of course, then is I resigned, and I was sanctioned for that. But I want to show you what that looks like here in terms of what did I file. So I filed a motion to withdraw as counsel, and I want you to see this down here. All I really said down here is this person has contacted a realtor to sell the property at issue in the case. And why did I do that? Because what our rules also say is that, the court wants to know, why are you withdrawing? Why? You have to say why. And so I've said this sentence right here. And the state bar prosecutor said that I was not supposed to do that. So basically, I'm going to read this sentence. The defendant has contacted a realtor to sell the property at issue in this case, which is directly contrary to this court's stipulated order dated February 22nd and this case number. So this personal representative signed an order agreeing to sell the property at the courthouse. So that was the agreement, but that's not what the person did. And the state bar prosecutor said to me, you shouldn't have revealed that. They refused. In other words, the state bar prosecutor refused, as I pull up the rule over here. Sorry to look away. I don't know how else to do that, really, because I want to quote from this rule and have a conversation with you about it. And so it's, typically, yes, it is shielded, but there's an exception, and the exception extends to crimes. I'm looking from the rule now, even of a pretty minor nature. And that the rationale is that, clients are not allowed to use lawyers to help them commit illegal activity. And that is logical. That defeats the whole purpose, does it not? I mean, that cannot be the case. And if I know about it, I'm not going to facilitate that. I'm not going to be complicit. And of course, I warned the person multiple times in writing, you cannot do this. You've signed an order. You have a court order. And it's really dismaying to me and somewhat surprising that court orders are being just ignored. And it is law, just like a statute or a case ruling. And so I've put up on the screen criminal, fraudulent, and prohibited transactions. And this rule prohibits a lawyer, I'm reading this now, from knowingly counseling or assisting a client to commit a crime or fraud. When the client's course of action has already begun and is continuing, the lawyer's responsibility is especially delicate. The lawyer is required to avoid assisting the client, for example, by drafting or delivering documents that the lawyer knows are fraudulent. And that applies to what is going on nationally. When this lawyer knows that this is fraudulent, you cannot continue concealing that wrongdoing. And this is my call out, is in a democracy, in a self-regulating profession, when you know that another lawyer is doing this, you need to call it out. That is the very definition of a self-governing profession. You can't just watch it happen. And so I'm reading further, picking up right here. A lawyer may not continue assisting a client in conduct that that lawyer originally supposed was legally proper, but then discovers is criminal or fraudulent. So when I learned that this realtor had been contacted to list the property, it says the lawyer must therefore withdraw from the representation of the client in the matter. And I did that in this rule. And we have a state bar prosecutor that ignores the rule. So here we are back around to talk about, well, these lawyers that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, say in the Department of Justice right now, or in some of the other institutions, well, they're going to be referred to their bar association, as they rightfully should be. But what happens if the bar associations are selectively or not at all even investigating or prosecuting this, where the rule is clear? And so I'm saying in a self-regulating profession, that's why I'm doing this. I'm standing up and saying, yeah, you need to follow this rule, everyone. And that applies to the lawyers, it applies to the judges, it applies across the board. It's not like anybody in this profession is exempt from that. And then you see it says here next, in some cases, withdrawal alone might be insufficient. It may be necessary for the lawyer to give notice of the fact of withdrawal and to disfirm any opinion, document, affirmation, or the like. And that is exactly what I did. And rather than the state bar prosecutor upholding that, the state bar prosecutor is a lawyer. The state bar prosecutor has taken an oath to uphold the law. The state bar prosecutor has that duty to make sure that this happens for society, for that balance, for the rule of law, and instead is ignoring that rule. And instead, in this upside down world that we have now about this, instead sanctions me for disclosing this. And this is just backwards of what is supposed to happen. And I think it is my duty as a lawyer to stand up and say, here's what is supposed to be happening. And it just simply isn't. Where we're thinking that a state bar association is going to take care of lawyers who are committing prosecutorial misconduct, that's not always happening. And I'm saying be aware of this, fellow lawyers. Those of us interested in the Constitution, this is what we're talking about. The rule of law, this is what we're talking about. And do I feel like screaming and yelling and ranting about this? Absolutely I do. But I know that it's really hard to listen to a message like that. And so I'm not. I certainly feel like it, for sure. And this is communication from the realtor saying, oh yeah, this person called me multiple times to list the property in violation of that court order. So we also have this on transcript, and I am making available, all of these documents are available. If you want to comment to me, I would really appreciate some discussion about this as well from lawyers and non-lawyers. But I want you to be aware of this because as I was mentioning earlier, I've worked in a law office all of my adult life, and I've worked around estates my whole life too. And it's appalling, actually, to me, always has been, how often there is theft from an estate. And how often the parties involved just kind of look away about that. And this is a really good example of that. And I'm able to talk about it because it's my own case. I'm not revealing anything. It's not confidential information because there is fraud happening, and because this is, this is my own case. And so, just to be clear about this, yes, here we go. Let's look at this rule about confidentiality. Yes, but a lawyer may reveal information relating when they reasonably believe it is necessary. And the thing is about this crime or fraud, it's not just necessary, it's a requirement. And here's the rest of that rule that wouldn't fit up entirely on the screen: to prevent the client from committing a crime or fraud that is reasonably certain to result in substantial injury to the financial interests or property of another, and in furtherance of which the client has used or is using the lawyer's services. So yeah, that's my duty any lawyer's duty. And that's what's going on now. There's so many instances of that in the national discourse of what is happening right now. But this is a prime example of crime or fraud that is required to be disclosed. Instead of, I live in a MAGA red state, and what does the state bar prosecutor do? Punishes me, sanctions me for revealing crime or fraud. That's just upside down in what we want as a society. And I think it's really important to think about that in terms of, what do we really want in our rules, our values, what's important to us, and especially how much of the time in estates items are being stolen. I mean, like I said, it's appalling. It's a felony. Are lawyers reporting this? Are the lawyers that aren't reporting this and facilitating it, are they being sanctioned? No. And so it's really nice to think that the State Bar Association is going to do this. And I'm telling you that is not always the case. So we're going to continue to talk about crime, fraud, corruption, my own case nationally, and the rules. I'm making those available to you. Please comment, like the video. That helps get it out about crime and fraud, especially what is going on right now in the country. And thank you for watching. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.